And we do have a quorum present. So I will call this meeting of the Plan Commission of June 8th, 2020 to order. First, we'll get some information from our technical facilitator.
Well, welcome to our virtual meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. If you lose your connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number in your original email. To members and city staff, members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak. The name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed in today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. The first item on our agenda is public comment, and to my knowledge, we do not have any registrants for public comment. Is that correct, Heather? Okay, no registrants for public comment. Next is communications, disclosures, and recusals. Members of the body should make any required disclosures or recusals under the city's ethics code. Do we have any such disclosures or recusals? Seeing no raised hands, we apparently do not have any. Next on the agenda is the minutes of the May 18th, 2020 regular meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Seeing no raised hands about additions or corrections, do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Commissioner Cantrell. I have tried to unmute you, Commissioner Cantrell, and it doesn't seem to be working.
Commissioner Cantrell, you may have a prompt that came up asking you to unmute. There was an update.
There. Okay, very good.
If you could give me just a second. There was an update to Zoom, which now will prompt you when you're unmuted to unmute yourself.
Okay.
So all committee members, this is probably will show up for every one of you.
Thank you, Jesse. Okay, Commissioner Cantrell.
I move approval of the minutes.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Alder Heck.
Second, please.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. There are no raised hands to object. Therefore, the minutes are approved. Okay, next on our agenda is a review of the schedule of upcoming meetings. The next regular meeting is June 29th, to be followed by two meetings in July 13th and July 27th. Then we also have a special working session to look at big picture item of housing in this particular meeting. And please note the changed date is now July 30th, and it will be from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and that will be a virtual meeting also. Okay, next we have routine business. The following items listed in this section of the agenda are referred to the Plan Commission as generally required by Section 62.23 paren 2 Wisconsin statutes and Section 16.01 of the Madison General Ordinances, which requires that the Common Council refer any question concerning the location of any public building, the location, extension, or widening of any street, park, or other public grounds within the city to the Plan Commission for its consideration and report regarding consistency with the city's comprehensive plan before final action is taken. Further, the Plan Commission is required to provide a recommendation to the Council on the acquisition of public land for the establishment or enlarging of streets, parks, playgrounds, sites for public buildings, and reservations pertaining to the same, and the conveyance of any surplus real estate not needed for these purposes, with reservations concerning the future use and occupation of such real estate, so as to protect the public works of the city and to preserve the view, appearance, light, air, and usefulness of such public works, and to promote the public health and welfare as recommended in adopted plans and policies. Agenda item 2. Legistar 60491, authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to execute a consent to occupy permanent storm sewer easement for the benefit of Commonwealth Development Incorporated, a Wisconsin non-stock corporation, or their successors and assigns to permit certain private improvements within an existing easement granted to the public for storm sewer purposes on the property located at 5802 Raymond Road, 20th Alder District. Agenda item 3, Legislar 60496, authorizing the execution and acceptance of quitclaim deeds to correct the boundaries of land owned by the Madison Water Utility at 2023 Wheeler Road, Town of Burke, authorizing the city to cooperate in the redivision of the Madison Water Utility lands, and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute a petition to attach the subject lands to the city. And agenda item 4, Legistar 60659, authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute a lease with New Bridge Madison Incorporated, allowing for the use of a portion of the Warner Park Community Recreation Center for not-for-profit community services and related administrative use in the 12th Alder District. Do I have a motion on these 3 agenda items of routine business? And again, Commissioner Cantrell, could you unmute yourself? It doesn't seem to be working from my end.
I move approval of the routine business items.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Lemmer, could you? Very good. Commissioner Lemmer.
Sorry, I second.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions, comments on these 3 agenda items? Seeing no raised hands, I will assume unanimous consent unless I do see any raised hands then with objection. No raised hands, so motion passes unanimously. It not yet being 5:45, so we cannot start the public hearings. I will ask Ms. Stouter if she could please give the secretary's report. Ms. Stouter.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let's see, on June 29th, we'll have the Oscar Mayer Special Area Plan, likely. It's making its way through other boards, committees, and commissions right now, and that's the date that we expect that it will be back before you. Also, the Comprehensive Plan Progress Update, the first annual brief update, and I did send you all the link to that you could begin reviewing it. That will go to the Transportation Planning and Policy Board next week, and then will be in your hands, hopefully June 29th. We'll have the return of the Madison Yards proposal at the Gardner and Sheboygan proposal. We'll be back before you. And then two other notable items. 816 Williamson Street is demolition and conditional use for a new 24 unit mixed use building. And then 1937 and 1949 Winnebago Street, demolition and conditional use for a new 4-story mixed use building with 13 apartment units. And then moving forward to July 13th, the notable items I'll mention are 133 East Lakeside Street. That's a rezoning and a conditional use to construct a 5-story mixed-use building with 104 apartments. 603 South Point Road is a rezoning and for the construction of a 4-story 92-unit apartment building and two 2-unit homes. And then finally, 1825 to 1837 Aberg Avenue, demolition and conditional use for a mixed-use building with 64 apartments, and then also a 6-unit townhouse building. Thank you very much.
Ms. Stouter, if people have any questions on the Comprehensive Plan Progress Update report, should those questions go to you, or to whom should those be directed?
Sure. If commissioners do have questions before seeing it on the 29th, you can direct those questions to me, and I'll coordinate with Brian Grady and others in his section to get answers.
Okay. Very good. It is 5:42 according to my clock, so we will stand informal for a few minutes until 5:45 when we can have our public hearing. It being 5:45, we will begin the public hearing portion of our agenda. It is the custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items on which staff believes an application has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by various city departments, and on which the applicant accepts those conditions, and there are no individuals who have registered to speak in opposition to the item tonight. Those items are placed on a consent agenda, and they are addressed at the beginning of the public hearing section of our meeting. People here on those agenda items then can disconnect early unless a member of the commission requests separation, in which case the item is removed from the consent agenda and taken in the regular course of business. We also deal with referrals along with items on the consent agenda. Of the items before us today, the following are proposed for the consent agenda. Agenda item 12, 7213 Mineral Point Road, 9th Alder District. Agenda item 13, the Legistar 6662, amending portions of Madison General Ordinances. I will read those into the record as we don't have any requests to take those off the consent agenda. And then there are two items for referral. Agenda item 9, Legistar 60173, located at 402 through 414 East Washington Avenue, 8 through 12 North Franklin Street, and 9 North Hancock Street, Urban Design District 4, 2nd Alder District. Consideration of a demolition permit to allow 5 residential structures and a commercial building to be demolished. Consideration of a conditional use in the urban mixed use district for a multifamily dwelling with more than 8 dwelling units. Consideration of a conditional use in the UMX district for outdoor recreation, and consideration of a conditional use to construct 2 additional stories in area H of the additional heights area map in MGO section 28.071 paren B to allow construction of a 10-story mixed-use building containing 3,300 square feet of commercial space and 156 apartments. That is to be referred to the July 3rd, 2020, pending a recommendation by the Urban Design Commission. Also to be referred, agenda item 11, Legistar 60347, located at 5622 East Park Boulevard, 17th Alder District. Consideration of a conditional use in the commercial center zoning district for multifamily dwellings with 8 or more units. Consideration of conditional use in the commercial center district for outdoor recreation, and consideration of conditional use for dwelling units in a mixed use building in the CC district. Consideration of a conditional use for a multi-tenant building in the CC district exceeding 40,000 square feet floor area to construct a complex with 2 4-story mixed-use buildings and 3 3-story multifamily buildings containing 4,300 square feet of overall commercial space and 306 apartments with accessory pool and clubhouse. Are there any, does anyone wish to take either agenda item 12 or 13 off of the consent agenda? I see no raised hands, so I will read those then into the record, opening the public hearing on agenda item 12. Legistar 60464, located at 7213 Mineral Point Road, 9th Alder District. Consideration of a conditional use in the Commercial Center District for a major alteration to a planned multi-use site containing more than 40,000 square feet of floor area, and where 25,000 square feet of floor area is designed or intended for retail use, to allow construction of a one-story, approximately 7,000 square foot commercial building at West Town Mall. Also, agenda item 13, Legistar 60662, amending portions of Madison General Ordinances 28.061, 28.082, and 28.091 to allow electric power production and or heating and cooling plants as a permitted or conditional use in all mixed use and commercial districts and the suburban employment district, suburban employment center district, employment campus, and agricultural district, amending Madison General Ordinances 28.151 to allow electric power production and or heating and cooling plants using solar as an energy source as permitted use in the districts listed above, and amending Madison General Ordinances 28.211 to eliminate the superfluous definition of electric power production from the zoning code. I will close the public hearing on both of those items, and I will look for a motion on the two referrals and the I'm going to ask you to unmute. We're obviously having problems with the mute and unmute. So, Commissioner Cantrell.
I move approval of the consent agenda and the referrals.
And Alder Rummel. Good.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about items number 5 and 6. Are there additional registrations besides the 2 letters that we got? I mean, are there people wanting to speak? Because if those are just the 2 letters, they seem to have no issue.
5 and 6 are not on the consent agenda.
Based on the note from staff earlier about what was that there were registrants, and all I see are letters in support, but not clearly wishing to speak. And I'm wondering if there are other. Yes,
there are. There are people who are registered wishing to speak.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Can we get a second on the motion on the consent agenda?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Alder Rummel. We have a motion to approve the items on the consent agenda. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. I see no raised hands to object, so that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. The next item that we will take up is agenda item 5, Legistar 60498, creating section 28.022 through 00441 of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of properties located at 202 Midvale Boulevard, 4410 Regent Street, and 215 Price Place, 11th Alder District, from Suburban Employment District to Neighborhood Mixed Use District. Then also to be considered along with that is agenda item 6, Legistar 60366, located at 215 Price Place, 11th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the proposed neighborhood mixed use district to construct a private parking facility. And we do have a presentation by our staff, Mr. Colin Punt. Okay, Mr. Punt.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, all right. So before the commission are separate but related requests to rezone 3 parcels of land and the conditional use to build a parking structure on one of the 3 parcels. The first is the request to change the zoning of 202 Midvale Boulevard, 4410 Regent Street, and 215 Price Place from SEC to NMX, Suburban Employment to Neighborhood Mixed Use. The comprehensive plan and the 2 neighborhood plans that include this site all recommend community mixed use. Planning staff believes that the NMX district is the most appropriate to permit development most compatible with those plan recommendations. The related conditional use request is for consideration of a 2-story, 109 stall private parking structure at 215 Price Place, which is currently a surface parking lot. Staff have recommended approval, though I direct your attention to the discussion of conditional use approval 9 and its relation to the building form standards for parking buildings. Staff recommended conditions from planning and zoning regarding the appearance of the sloped parking decks and the open facade address those certain issues. And then I will be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Punt. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Steve Harms of 2625 Research Park Drive in Fitchburg in support and wishing to speak, representing Whitney Point Properties, LLC. Mr. Harms, you are on.
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, there's two reasons for this rezoning and subsequent redevelopment beginning in phases. The first is the clinic is undergoing some growth. They see it as a long-term growth plan. They will expect to have to expand clinic space in some fashion or other within the next 3 to 5 years, or at least start the planning in that time frame. And along with that, an event occurred which will delete the shared parking lease that they were engaging with the church across the street to the south, where staff was parking. They had about 40 staff members parking in that church parking lot. The church, for their own reasons, and it has to do with 501c3 status, not there's no other issue other than it's just a legal issue. Can't lease to an outside group anymore, so they have to find alternate ways of parking their staff. And after looking at lots of alternatives over the last, really this started almost a year ago, looking at alternative sites, moving the clinic. It was determined that given the fact that there's about 75% of their patient population right now is within 1.5 miles to 2 miles of the clinic. You know, it's a very neighborhood-oriented business. They really desired to stay. So we met with the city staff to explore how this could happen and to increase density for not only the clinic, but also maybe provide some other redevelopment opportunity given the land that's there. And so the rezoning that's before you and the first phase of the project, which is to increase the amount of parking to handle not only today's needs, but also future needs, is part of this request. As I mentioned, the clinic is an integral part of both the University Hill Farms and Hoyt area plan. And so both neighborhood plans obviously were consulted. And it was felt that this rezoning fit both of those plans best. The redevelopment, we have no specific plans. Nothing has been drawn, not even schematically, as far as redevelopment, clinic expansion. We don't know how that's going to happen, whether we expand the existing building or demolish that, do something different. That is to be determined, but there is an initial parking need that we need to happen right now. Just a short word of the deck is 3 levels. It's designed a little differently than most parking decks. We designed the lower level to be staff
Mr.
parking
Harms,
only.
That concludes your 3 minutes.
Sure.
Thank you. Our next registrant is Fred Jaeger, 4414 Regent Street, in opposition and wishing to speak. Mr. Jaeger, 3 minutes.
Fred, you should have a prompt on your screen.
Mr. Jaeger, can you unmute yourself?
Did.
Okay, you're on.
Am I on?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to tell a little bit about myself. I'm Fred Jaeger. I was a Madison resident, born and raised in Madison. I grew up in the Hill Farms, and I'm currently the owner of the Grayson Building, which is the little building at the corner of Price and Regent. It's a continuous family ownership for the building since 1967. And my parents, well, actually, I feel like I was raised there, and my parents, I inherited with their passing a couple of years ago. My family has been my parents really lived in the Hill Farms for over 60 years. Regarding this development, I was never contacted by any party regarding this development. I'm opposed to the parking garage as proposed. First of all, it's unsightly because it will, it really enclosed my building that I have. It obstructs my views in the reception area, and there's no aesthetic considerations given to the gray sides of that lean up against the building. There's some landscaping on Price Place and or Vernon Boulevard, but nothing that would affect me in my office. Second of all, there's no thought or evaluation for snow removal and ice. I wish I'd say there's going to be no ice and snow in Madison, but I know that's not true. And I think this is the way it's proposed will present an extreme problem. I also think that I don't see it as a neighborhood enrichment. I completely understand the change of zoning, which I have no comment on. I'm not opposed to the change of the zoning, but I do not like the way the garage is being proposed. And lastly, we've always had a friendly relationship with the Associated Physicians, both professionally and as a neighbor. And I'm not in opposition to them as a business group or wish to be. I don't have an adversarial relationship. But I speak in opposition to the garage. This is my personal feeling, I'm not a real estate developer, but I don't think it's the highest and best use of the land where it's being proposed to build a parking garage like this where it may be lasting a couple of years. I really feel that the Hill Farm area and the Hilldale area needs better development thought through. I also understand that in the past, we've also shared the parking with the Mormon church across the street. They've always been great neighbors, and I also understand where they have to find an alternative parking spot. And I know that parking is a difficulty in that area, but I don't see this as a positive solution for the parking restrictions in the area as well as for the long-term development. I know there's another letter submitted in opposition that I'm aware of. So anyway, I don't see it as a positive development, both affecting me personally, it'll affect my patients negatively. I'm a general dentist. The clients or the tenants in the building don't look at it as being a positive enrichment of the area for their ingress and egress, and they're people that come and go throughout the day. So, and like I said, lastly, I was never consulted or told or anything. All I found about was what was posted. And
thank you, Mr. Jaeger. That concludes your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just a note to commissioners that we will come to questions after we hear from our last registrant, who is Marc Schellpfeff, 4414 Regent Street, opposed and wishing to speak.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'll be brief. I work at 4414 in Dr. Jaeger's building, and just wanted to speak briefly just to, again, I guess as we've watched that area evolve, being there for 5 years now and understanding kind of the activity and pedestrian activity that moves along Price Place as well as Vernon Boulevard. Just, I guess I would ask the commissioners to consider that and looking at what's being proposed from a parking structure here. How does that pedestrian experience become enhanced by this? I think when we look at UMX and the actual response for how a building engages the street, and how it begins to articulate itself from a pedestrian experience. I don't think this really goes to that tune personally. I know staff has recommended that they continue to work on those two elevations. I would ask that there's some consideration given to maybe requesting an overall plan for the development prior to putting down what will be in the end more or less a permanent structure at the corner of Price Place and Vernon Boulevard. So that's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Schellpfeffer. We have one more registrant, Paul Cuda, 4414 Regent Street, in opposition, not wishing to speak. Are there any questions for any of the registrants, Mr. Harms, Jaeger, or Schellpfeffer? Alder Rummel, you're going to have to unmute yourself. It's still not working.
No.
Okay, you're on.
Chair, this is the new way it works. It's just we have to do things now.
Okay.
I guess this question is for Mr. Harms. Are you aware that the Plan Commission has been talking about bird-friendly glass, and can you tell us about the work that you all have been thinking about the wall of glass on this building? It looks blue in the drawing, but I don't want to assume it's blue, and I just wondered what you would have to say about that.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Blue is kind of how it comes out on that model, but it would be a clear low E glass, so and with no tint on it. So in terms of the amount of mirroring that's going to happen on the north side, there would be very little, and the other stair tower faces east. So I suppose there could be some in the mornings when the early morning sun hits it, but the intent is for that to be as clear as possible. We really want those elevations to be all glass, just from a safety security standpoint. That is the reason we're doing it. Architecturally, it's great, it's fine, but the primary driver is so that anybody can see in day or night. It will have obviously lighting 24/7, especially at night is required. So in this particular case, given its location, and frankly, even on the east side, given the trees that are already there that are staying, I really don't see that as a huge issue.
Thank you. I would advise you to talk to staff like Chris Wells, who's been working with some alders on a future ordinance, which would not affect your application, but just so you know what we're thinking about these clear glass and birds, so that you can do whatever you can possibly to adjust to that.
Sure.
I do.
Be glad to.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Schellpfeffer.
Okay, yep. Mr. Schellpfeffer.
I happen to know that you're a professional, because I've been around for a while. And so what would you advise as an architect and person who proposes new spaces for making a positive space for pedestrians?
Well, I think not knowing, and I always have difficulty answering that, Marcia, as I'm sitting here not knowing the full story. So as Steve listens on, I sympathize with me answering this question for him. But I think it's less about what is happening there related to the function of the building. It's more about how does one move along that building and perceive what's happening. Right now it just renders out as kind of a precast or large concrete structure with no thought or articulation towards the sidewalk. And I think when you look at what's going on around Hilldale and the amount of pedestrian traffic that's moving up and down those streets, to introduce something at a fairly prominent pedestrian corner as you head south out of Hilldale just seems to be a very severe injection of a parking structure at this point. whether it's some sort of paneling or articulation along both of those streets that I think staff has recommended and put in that report, that certainly starts to help it. I guess I look at a site like this and wonder why would you be taking up a third of an overall development with kind of a parking structure, understanding that there's kind of an immediate need, but I think it would be easier for staff and others to be able to understand it in more of a large picture development versus kind of a phase one with no real second or third phase planned currently. I think you really have to consider it as being a finished product versus a phased approach if you don't know what phase 2 or 3 could potentially be.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Are there any other questions? Commissioner Sundquist.
It seems to have unmuted me by magic. Okay, I didn't have to do anything.
Good.
Right. This is for Mr. Harms. As you were finishing your initial presentation, you were starting to talk about the design of the parking structure, which is both noted, as we just said, noted in the staff report as needing some design modifications, and now Mr. Schellpfeff has kind of said the same thing. Just want to give you a chance to respond and see what you might be able to do on that.
Well, the design is really just centered around providing that parking. Obviously, this started with a budget, and we did look at some alternatives in terms of how to construct the building. Precast concrete is the only one that falls anywhere near within the budget. That being said, are there some things we can do with color, with some other things? Yes, and as we have done in past projects, we'll work with staff to work on those items and try to bring resolution to it.
Okay, thanks.
Well, I will add one thing. One of the things that was important for everybody, it goes along with safety, not only viewing into the stairwell, but viewing into the parking area itself. So, the entire ground level is as open as it can be, so that people walking by can view in there. It's from a security standpoint more than anything else. So obviously there's some limitations in design. We don't want to put a screen over it. That would defeat the purpose of the safety of that parking lot, especially with staff leaving late in the evening, in the winter when it's dark out. It'll be properly lit, but we don't want to obstruct that in any way. So, like I said, we'll work with staff, and if if we need to meet with Mark and Paul or the neighbors and show them what's going on, we'd be glad to do that. That's not an issue at all.
Thank you, Mr. Harms.
Sure.
Commissioner Spencer, and you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. I just had a couple questions for Stephen Harms. Just curious. So is the parking structure meant to accommodate all staff? I'm wondering what percentage of staff drive. Is it 100% that drive? Do a number take the bus? Do they bike? And do you offer any sort of commuter benefits if they wanted to take the bus? Because normally there are so many lines that serve this area.
Excellent question. As a matter course, during the part of any one day, there's somewhere between 75 and 85 staff members at the site, and currently only 40 to 50 are bringing cars. Some park in the lot. There's a few that park on the street. The rest bike, walk, take the bus. There's some carpooling that goes on, as well as just drop off by a spouse. So it is probably more like 55 to 60% of the staff park there.
Okay, but you're projecting right now. You said it was maybe 40 to 50 that drive, but you're projecting that like 70 more than that will drive in the future.
Well, that's current. That's current. So we're basically accommodating the same number of cars in the lower level of this deck as same as what's across the street. Our current levels are fine. The building will be designed to be added onto in the future, but that is a whole future that would go with future development. If the building expands and or there's a new building, that's part of a whole separate approval process. We're not precluding of putting additional instead of going on top of that building, we could put parking underneath another building. So it's undetermined. We're going to structure it to go the max as far as what's allowed by zoning there, which is doesn't really cost that much. But what happens in the future as far as additional parking for a larger clinic, that is all yet to be determined.
Okay. And then just design, I was just curious, you're near the Grayson building, and that building is so interesting and unique with its sort of textures and colors. It would be kind of interesting if the parking structure sort of incorporated some of those modern elements a little bit. Just a comment.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from commissioners to any of our registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Questions of staff? Commissioner Sundquist.
Yes, Mr. Pond, on the design issue, which, by the way, thank you for raising it in the staff report. It jives with what the neighbors are saying and seems important. So if this goes through, which I guess is an open question, how would you handle that condition? Would that be something that needs to be referred to UDC or come back to us, or is that something that you can handle with the applicant at the staff level?
I would say yes, that would be handled at the staff level. It is it's an issue coming out of both the zoning code in the section for residential or non-residential building forms. So zoning would look at it to make sure it's kind of meeting the letter of the law there. But then as I brought it up, as it plays off approval standard number 9, it would be something that planning staff would look at as well. So I think between zoning staff and planning staff, the two of us together, working with the applicant, we would ensure that it would meet the standards and kind of be consistent with whatever the plan commission's approval might be.
And I didn't, maybe I missed it when I read through the conditions. There's not a condition in there as drafted. This is something we need to do from today, right?
There is.
Is there one?
Yes. Conditions 1 and 2. 1 is from planning, 2 is from zoning. They're
sure. The
same
first
section.
One. Okay.
Yep. Both referencing the same section, but slightly different.
Read right over that. Okay. And this is a policy question that arises out of this. I'm surprised to hear that a church would have a C3 issue with parking. And if that's true, we may have like lots of shared parking issues. My own church rents parking to UW Health. Is this something that we need to be aware of? Is this something new that you guys are hearing about?
I'm not aware of any. That may be a question that Ms. Stouter has more input from.
I don't either. This is the first we've heard of it, but I agree that I think it's pretty broadly exercised throughout the community. It may be just an issue with this individual church. I'm not sure. We didn't delve into that much, but still see as redevelopment occurs and intensification of uses occur, regardless of where that parking's coming from, that shift from surface to structured is something that we'll probably be seeing more of in places like this. But we didn't delve into that specific issue with the church that they were parking at.
Is it appropriate, and would you guys have the bandwidth to call the Mormon church and ask them to double check that? Because it sounds like if the church is okay with the shared parking, then this whole thing doesn't have to happen, at least doesn't have to happen now, and if there is going to be structured parking, it could come in when the full redevelopment is on the table. Or is that stepping out of the lines? I mean, I know that Associated Physicians can't tell the church what to do. So if the church has decided something, that's all there is. But it's the best outcome for us is the shared parking.
Yeah, like I said, it's not something that we really delved into, but we could certainly contact the church to see if we could find out more if this doesn't end up being approved this evening.
And or even if it is, maybe they wouldn't need to build it just because they have the CUP. But it's and maybe there's something going on that their lawyers are feeling that is going to affect us down the road in other places. I don't know. It just seems like if there's some way to work that out, that would be the best thing. And maybe it's for naught. Okay, that is all I had. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I have a couple of related questions following up from Commissioner Sundquist. So it struck me like I always like to see plans that kind of think the future, and when they're not there and I'm approving a parking lot, there's something inside of me that just wants to say no. So I guess I need to know more about what staff knows about long-term plans and even your reference to the Hoyt plan talking about commercial uses on the ground floor and your conversations with the applicant about just the future redevelopment of and can maybe you just sort of describe all the parcels in the like that they would have control over, just so I have an understanding.
Mr. Putt?
Yes, I can do that. So the parcels included in the rezone are the Associated Physicians main building, which is directly south of the parcel that has the parking lot, which is at the northwest corner of the block. And then the third parcel, 202 North Midvale, is then to the east, fronting on Midvale across the street from the fire station. So those would be the three that would receive the rezone to NMX. As I understand it, the plans for the future are still kind of up in the air. The parking structure is intended both to accommodate the parking needs right now, as well as potentially making room in the future for redevelopment, whether that is just the clinic, or both properties that are not included in the conditional use, and whether that clinic remains there, is redeveloped, if that turns into kind of a more conventional mixed-use product that we see a lot of places with commercial on the first floor and residential above, or the neighborhood plans really kind of open it up for a lot of different types of uses, retail, commercial, office and services, usually residential above. The plans prefer not to have residential on the first floor. So I think there are a lot of different things that could go on, whether with the clinic in that space still, or the clinic moving somewhere else and a different type of mixed use sort of development occurring there.
But basically, it's just to be determined. The future is unknown, except for the short-term need for a parking structure.
Yeah, I would anticipate that most types of development that would come through would require a conditional use approval. And so most of the development that we would see there would come back to the Plan Commission. But right now we're making it so that the zoning will accommodate the development that the plans recommend.
Which could be any number of things. So
which could be any number of things.
And so you're saying that even though the original comp plan said CMU or whatever,
yep.
CMX,
yes.
NMX would be okay as well.
Yes, yeah. The NMX zoning district, I think, is probably the best district to accomplish the community mixed use land use recommendation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Rummel. Alder Heck.
I just wanted to interject a comment. I've been reading on the internet about what Commissioner Sundquist was asking about, and I think it would behoove us to figure this out. It looks very complex as of 2017 when tax code changed, that there are taxes as well as tax status concerns. So it's kind of interesting. That's all. Thanks.
Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes. Staff is concerned about the north and the west facades, but is also staff has any concerns about the other two facades, the east and south? Because although they're not visible from the street, they are visible from other properties.
I think going off the requirements of the zoning code, where we're really looking at visibility from the street along the south edge of the parking structure. There is the portion of the building owned by the registrants, but then the majority of that is faces the Associated Physicians building. It's a little bit difficult to kind of determine what the aesthetic needs are for the buildings facing other buildings. And as I discussed with Alder Rummel, a lot of those buildings may redevelop, things may change, things may be visible or become visible. So,
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? Commissioner Sundquist.
Yeah, just trying to figure out what the motion ought to be here. And this is, so I don't know if this is it or not, but if we approved the rezoning but referred or placed on file without prejudice the parking structure until concerns about the aesthetics and the design are worked out. Does that make sense, or should they both go together up and down?
This can operate as two separate items.
Okay, so what I just described wouldn't be unworkable.
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, I would be looking for a motion. Commissioner Sundquist.
So I think I'm going to move what I just suggested, that we approve the rezoning item 5, and that we refer for a month the item 6.
With the rationale for the referral?
That the design, I can speak to it a little bit more if I get a second, but the design is still at issue here and may or may not get there to be passable.
Okay, do I have a second? Commissioner Cantrell.
I'll second it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sundquist, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yeah, just briefly, I think we've kind of done it in the discussion here. The staff rightly pointed out that this doesn't really meet the standards. We have the neighbors who felt the same. And we have the applicant who said something about, well, there's only so much budget for, so much structure. So it's possible that for the budget that they have, they can't do it right. So I think we should, rather than to just make this a condition that they work out, I think we really need to have a little bit more assurance that it's going to be right, and we should take another look at it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Cantrell.
I concur with Commissioner Sundquist, totally.
Thank you. Alder Lemmer.
I saw that the alder for the area had popped up in my Brady Bunch view here, and it looks like she raised her hand. I just wanted to know what she had to say about the proposal.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Martin.
Hi. Well, thank you, Alder Lemmer, for bringing me up, etc., and to the commissioners for letting me speak right now. I do want to point out that the Hill Farms Neighborhood Association Planning Committee is supportive of the project, the parking ramp project, and I am as well. I do want to mention that my father, before he passed, was a patient at that particular clinic, and that the parking situation there is really difficult for elders and folks that have any kind of mobility issues. I know that I had to add probably, an extra 30 to 45 minutes to appointments to make sure that I could get him to the door and then park, and then afterwards collect him from whichever door, the front door or the back door, and bring him home. So I do want to mention that, or reiterate the support from the neighborhood planning committee from Mike Lawton that is entered into Legistar, and I want to give my support as well. So thanks.
Thank you, Alder Martin. Any other comments, discussion? Did you have something to add, Mr. Punt?
Yes, I just needed clarification on the motion.
Okay.
Commissioner Sundquist said refer it for a month. Are you suggesting just the next meeting, June 29, or to the July 14 meeting, or do you have a preference at all?
Commissioner Sundquist.
I would leave that to staff. I was roughly a month. I just think we'll know yes or no. I don't think it should take longer than that. They should be able to have a few conversations and come back and give us their best shot. I think our next meeting is too packed, but maybe the one after.
Okay.
Is that sufficient information, Mr. Punt, or
Yes.
Ms. Stouter? Did you have?
Just one suggestion that perhaps a good way forward right now would just be to separate these into two, since they might have different vote outcomes. So just to take up item 5 first would be my suggestion.
Okay, in terms of, okay. Okay, do we need any, we don't need any further clarification on the motion though, I would assume. We know what that is and we'll just vote on then number 5 first. Are people comfortable with that? Did you have something, Commissioner Sundquist?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really sure why the motion needs to do that. I think it's one concept that, you know, if I think it's fine, but I'm not sure what advantage it is by splitting it. I think it is clearer if we do them both together, but if there's I'll go with staff.
Ms. Stouter, did you have a rationale that you would like to share for splitting them?
My sense from the discussion is that the vote on number 5 may just be unanimous and that it may not be on number 6 and there might be some back and forth and more discussion.
That's fair. Okay, fair enough.
Okay. Okay, so then we will take the motion on number 5 first. Any more discussion or questions about that? Okay, seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Motion on number 5 passes unanimously. Then moving on to number 6, which is to refer to a future meeting. So that could be the next meeting or a subsequent meeting, depending on how things can be worked out to address the issues that have been discussed. Okay. Any further discussion on agenda item 6? Seeing none, again, I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. I see no raised hands, so the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We then will move on to agenda item 7. Legistar 60003, 902 through 908 East Main Street, Urban Design District 8, 6th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the traditional employment district for a building exceeding 68 feet in height, consideration of a conditional use for a parking reduction of more than 20 automobile spaces and 25% or more of the required parking, and consideration of a major alteration to a conditional use planned multi-use site containing a hotel to allow the construction of a 5-story, approximately 92,000 square foot office building in a planned multi-use site containing a 144-room hotel and an approved 11-story, 230,000 square foot office building with shared 680 stall parking structure. We do have a discussion by staff. Mr. Parks.
Yes, thank you. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, 902-908 East Main Street is a request to construct a 5-story, 92,000 square foot building at the northeasterly corner of East Main and South Patterson Streets in what is otherwise referred to as the Archipelago Village development, which is also developed with the existing 144-room Hotel Indigo, a portion of which occupies the former Kluter Grocery Warehouse. And also in the Archipelago Village development is an approved but not yet under construction 11-story, approximately 252,000 square foot office building, which will have a 680 stall parking structure constructed roughly mid-block. This is a block that, with the exception of one parcel, comprises the Archipelago Village development. The applicant
is seeking approval to construct a building that is 9 feet taller than the allowable height in the traditional employment zoning district, and is also seeking approval of a major alteration to a planned multi-use site that contains a hotel. Finally, the project requires a parking reduction from the Plan Commission. The project, based on zoning, is required to provide 967 parking stalls. They are proposed, 937 parking stalls, and parking for the 92,000 square foot building that's before you tonight, as well as the hotel, the 11-story office building yet to start construction, and potentially additional development on the block will be served by the 680 stall garage. There is a deficit of approximately 257 parking stalls as a result of the parking required by the zoning code for the hotel and the 2 buildings, which account for approximately 344,577 square feet of space, most of which will be for office. Planning staff has reviewed the project and believes that the Plan Commission may find the conditional use standards met. The applicant has submitted a transportation demand management plan for the project, which was required both for the 11-story building and also for the proposed building. And so staff is recommending approval, finds that the project is in substantial conformance to the plan recommendations for the site, including the comprehensive plan, East Rail Corridor plan, and Capital Gateway East Washington build plan. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the project after the public hearing. And we'll also note that I believe staff from the Traffic Engineering Division is available to answer questions about the project, including the TDMP, should there be any by members of the Plan Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. Proceeding, I will open the public hearing. Our first registrant is Doug Hirsch, 749 University Row in Madison, in support, wishing to speak, representing Archipelago Village. Mr. Hirsch, you have 3 minutes. You're on. Mr. Hirsch?
Doug, you should have a prompt to unmute yourself.
Mr. Hirsch, it looks like you're unmuted from here.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Computer. I did submit a presentation. I don't know if that is available. So good evening. I'm the architect from Potter Lawson on the project, and I'm here to give you kind of a brief review of the project. This is a new office building for WIDA. You can go to the next slide. As part of the 900 block, the location is the corner of South Patterson and East Main Street of the 900 block behind the Hotel Indigo. The next slide. The existing buildings on the block, you can see the Hotel Indigo, and then as part of the master plan, both the telephone building in the upper left and will remain on site, as well as the Kluter building, and not part of the project is the City of Madison Employees Credit Union. So next slide. This is a graphic illustration of the block with WIDA on the corner there in the front. In the back, you can see the 929 building that was approved and the parking that Tim mentioned. There's a connector from the WIDA building to the parking garage, which is internal to the block. Also, just shown graphically are potential for future mixed-use buildings along East Main Street. Next slide. This is the site plan. Just to mention here that we have 2 internal drives around the WIDA building. All of the loading and trash for the buildings is taken care of on those internal drives, so that the external streets are left to be more pedestrian friendly with less of those services on the city streets. Next slide. This is just showing the phasing of the site with the 929 building in the yellow. The brick buildings, you can see phase one are existing. And then the blue building is the WIDA building. And then the future orange residential mixed use buildings on East Main Street. And next slide, sorry. I don't know how much time I have left, but Andy is also available to talk about the exterior design of the building.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hirsch. Are there any questions for Mr. Hirsch? Seeing none, our next registrant is Kurt Brink, 701 East Washington Avenue, in support and wishing to speak. He is indicating he is not representing any organization, but I am wondering if he might be representing Archipelago Village. Mr. Brink.
You should have a prompt on mute.
Mr. Brink?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
So you have 3 minutes, Mr. Brink.
Thank you. We're pleased to present the next phase of Archipelago Village with this new building at the corner of East Main and Patterson. As you've seen, we think we have a great brick building with great detailing around the windows. Another thing that we worked hard here is to try to make sure we activate East Main Street with the first floor and kind of make the whole project work together as a whole. That's the end of my introduction.
Is that all you have, Mr. Brink?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Brink? Seeing none, our next registrant is Andy Laufenberg, 749 University Row in Madison, in support and wishing to speak, representing Archipelago Village. Mr. Laufenberg.
Yes, can you bring up the presentation again, please? The same slide we let off. Great. So I'm going to talk about the design real quick. So there was a strong desire with this design to relate to the surrounding context. We wanted to create a building that is an industrial character that related to the East Rail corridors and that also related to the adjacent Cluter building in scale and character. But then we also wanted to do it in a more modern and contemporary way. So the language of this industrial character is it's simplified, to where just the windows inside of the bays are maybe just offset to one side versus offset to both sides. So that was kind of the first step with that. And within within the brick volume, we also wanted to make sure that we heightened the depth of the facade. So the windows are pushed back a foot from the original facade and the brick kind of tears out. There's a lot of depth and a lot of character on the brick area. We're also using really good high quality materials on the building. There's no ethos or anything like that. We're using brick and stone and anodized aluminum with glass, a lot of curtain wall glass. And then set back from the industrial area, glassier elements start to highlight the entrances of the building. So on the left-hand side at the corner of Main and Patterson, you see a glass volume that's cantilevered out, highlighting that corner or accenting the corner. And then towards the main employee entrance, another glassy volume is pushed back from the brick facade and kind of floats over and through. And so in this character, it doesn't just occur on this facade. So even if you go to the back of the building, around all the sides, we're using the same language on all the facades. So I think that's about all I had to quickly touch on the design. I know Doug had some more comments that he wanted to talk about with sustainability. If he could do that, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Laufenberg. Any questions for Mr. Laufenberg? Seeing none, we have no other speakers, but some who are available to answer questions. The next registrant is Jeff Kell, 910 West Wingrid Drive, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, representing Strand Associates. The next registrant is Andy Lothenberg, 749 University Row, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, available to answer questions, representing Archipelago Village. Next registrant is Tony Miller, East Park Boulevard in Madison. It says Madison, Minnesota. That's interesting. In support, not wishing to speak, representing Kurt Brink. Dan O'Glaughlin, 222 West Washington Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Representing Archipelago Village is the attorney for Archipelago. The next registrant is John Thousand, East Park Boulevard, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, available to answer questions, representing Archipelago Village. And Matt Brink, 1701 Tyranny Drive, Wanakee, in support, not wishing to speak, available to answer questions, representing Archipelago Village. Those are all the registrants. Are there questions of any of the registrants? Commissioner Cantrell. You need to unmute yourself.
Okay.
There, now you're unmuted.
Okay. Maybe Mr. Hirsch can talk about this sustainability design features of this project and bird-friendly glass, if that's being considered, or any issue, if that's being addressed at all.
Mr. Hirsch?
Yes, we did have a slide also that listed a few of these things. I guess one of the major sustainable elements is that this is an urban infill project, adding density, employment downtown and existing environment. It's a mixed-use site. There are a lot of local amenities with a walk score of 91, biker's paradise also for accessing the building. The materials on the building are all high quality. This is a long-term building that will be here for a long time, hopefully a future landmark. The building is using a VRF system, which is a high efficiency system, which can exchange heat across the floor plate from one side to the other. It's in-floor perimeter radiant heat, also really an awesome, comfortable system. As far as we've done the energy modeling, and we are 17% more efficient than code on electrical use, and 30% more efficient than code on gas utilization. Also, this is not an all glass building. Only 28% is actually vision glass. So the rest of the facade is insulated. We are using bird glass in some small areas because it does add quite a bit to the cost of the glazing. At the bridge that connects the building to the parking garage where birds can see through the bridge, we are using the black dot frit pattern on that portion of the glass. And then we have a glass handrail on the 5th floor balcony, which would also be perceived as not there by the birds. So that also has bird glass. We've looked at, Alder Rummel had asked us to look at the corner because that piece is glass as well. Even though that portion of the building does have columns, does have activity in the building. That area was $26,000 to add additional bird glass, the frit coating in that area. So it's it does add quite a project. I hope that answers your questions.
Thank you.
Do you have any further questions, Commissioner Cantrell?
No, not at this time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Sundquist.
Yes, this is probably for the registrant from Strand or maybe somebody else from the development team. The transportation management plan, it has a lot in it about existing conditions and how, there was just a mention of the walk score. And so that's all granted. The best TDM is where you locate it, and it's located in a great place for reducing auto traffic. But also the other part of it is what you guys are going to do. So I wonder if you could just summarize what the commitments are as opposed to things you're going to consider. Like, what are the hard commitments in here? You're going to hire a coordinator. Is that a full-time position? I mean, how many hours a week is that going to be? Could you just flesh out exactly what the commitments are that you are going to, that are part of this?
Does somebody from the development team want to take that on?
I think it should be
Jeff, you should be unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Hirsch?
Jeff Held from Strand should take that.
Okay.
Jeff, you're unmuted.
Mr. Held? It looks like you're unmuted, Mr. Held.
Hear me okay?
Yep, now we can.
Okay. Yeah, it takes a few seconds to get that pop up, I think.
Yes.
So it's a good question, and I may ask either Matt or Kurt to follow up with some of the details. But we did speak about this last week, and the plan right now is that the property management firm for the site will designate the transportation management coordinator. So that is a designated position, and their job is essentially to work with the city staff to identify how well the TDM measures are working, and they are also to file a report annually, at least annually for the first 5 years. And the goal being that, as you mentioned, this is an ideal site in terms of it's got as much built-in natural traffic demand management features as you could ask for. And so I think the staff, the traffic engineering staff, and others are very interested to see how effective the TDM measures will be. And many of them are sort of baked in, as you mentioned. So things like having lockers and showers available for people to make it easier to bike commute or to walk. It's on a major transit route with East Washington Avenue, potentially a bus rapid transit route. In addition, I guess I'll make a note on the parking. My understanding, so the staff report notes 680 stalls. I think the designers have managed to come up with some additional stalls, and they're up to 713 now. And so that does represent about a 24% reduction from the 937 per code. So they've managed to get that a little higher. But I also want to point out there's 246 bicycle stalls, which is well beyond 4 or 5 times the number required by code. So I think the team is willing to go the extra mile in terms of getting reduced automobile traffic to the site. In terms of the actual the means by which the TMC would be designated, I'd probably refer to either Kurt or Matt if you want to hear more on that. It has to do with the condo documentation or the condominium documents. I'm not too familiar with the legal workings of that, but I know, and I think traffic engineering staff would agree that there is a real commitment here to continue to work with staff and a desire to see this be successful from a TDM standpoint.
Mr. Brink, do you want to take this further?
Yes. Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Yes. This is, we've been working over the past several months with traffic department as everybody's trying to work on creating the traffic demand management plan. The coordinator is a very critical position because this to kind of set the prototype for the future. The property manager that's on site all the time will hire a coordinator with it. But starting basically after this meeting, we'll directly start working with traffic to work the matrix out that we're all going to agree to. And we think that's very critical, and the data from it is very critical. And so traffic has been very helpful trying to help us map this out. And this gives us time to work through what they're looking for, what matrix we're going to check with. So when we do start the parking, we have the way to look at it, and then what matrix we're going to check at the end of the year as we keep reviewing it. But this is going to be ongoing. This isn't going to be something we just look at the end of the year up to this. So to answer your question, we'll start right away as a coordinator with us being totally involved with it from the beginning. Then as we interview the different property managers coming in and create the coordinator, we'll take direct responsibility for it at all times, but constantly working with traffic and staff to make sure we have the documentation right, to make sure this is done properly.
Okay, thank you for that. And I don't mean to, my questions here are not suggesting you guys have done something wrong, but as you know, probably from being around, doing TDM plans in the city is a work in progress, as you sort of alluded to. But so going back to the coordinator, I mean, there's nothing specific in the language here that would preclude you just from giving somebody who was already going to be working on site a new title as TDM coordinator in addition to whatever they were doing. You see this as like again, how many hours a week are they working on TDM? I mean, how much of a time commitment do you see this? Probably not full time, right? You're probably not doing it full time, but what's the expectation?
That's all your questions are good questions. That's what we're all trying to check at. The expectation will be as many hours as it is to do right. And I think that's what's very critical as we work in the next few months with traffic, and they have specific people in there to work on this, is to really set what the matrix is. And it is really important because what is the future of the demand models and how does it work and how do we set the criteria for it? So that coordinator will probably spend quite a bit of time in the future. Then as we work on the matrix, we'll figure out what it is. We'll be able to answer more probably as we come week to week to week through to where we have a good document. And it is so important to us that we have this figured out. And what's really important in here is that we identify who's in there, which we can work through our leases, but also too, there is very critical that we want to make sure that this is done right so the city can also compete properly to get the bus rapid transit through on their grant. And we think it's a good living area. The other factor is here is that how it's utilized, because at night, the ramp is pretty well vacant because it's mainly office during the day. So to answer the question, it'll be quite a bit of time in the beginning. And as I say, we'll be fully involved in it completely. So we understand that if the traffic coordinator will spend as much time to do it right, because there really isn't a traffic coordinator out there. So we want to make sure that the matrix is done right. So when we start the first occupancy, dealing with traffic staff, we've got what we're working through. But also what's been good about traffic dealing with us, it's considered a living document because it won't be static. Well, this works, this doesn't work. Let's check on this. How does it work through? And it becomes quite a bit as we work through it. So we hope to be, as we work through this, that we can understand what a coordinator does, what a real traffic demand model is, and how it functions. And we'll add the different data points as considered necessary by traffic, or we will be. So every question is a good question as we're all trying to figure this out to do it right.
Well, I got one more good question. So as you're having this iterative process to determine what works and what doesn't, I'm just asking for a sort of a general sense, what is success? I mean, is it success avoiding overflow parking? Is success keeping traffic down to a certain level and no queuing? Or what are the things that how will you know if whatever you're doing is working or not?
Well, how we'll know how it's working is that it's like when I'm in Portland, when we were there on the streetcar trip many, many years ago, that in our lobby, in the different areas, it tells when the buses are coming within the building. And that people find that they feel comfortable to use all the other forms of transportation. Also, we've tried to really make it a bike-friendly building in the sense also, with significant bike parking stalls, but also we have the showers and the lockers to do that also. So success will mean that people will feel they don't have to drive their car because of the bus rapid transit becomes simple. Normal bus is simple, bikes are simple, and we're trying to have enough things in the building to where all of a sudden, oh, the next bus is coming in 10 minutes. I better get downstairs. And so success means fewer people have to drive and use their car, but we have a way of showing it by just basically working with Strand. We've set up initial to some of the different people in the building, which is called a survey. We start out with the people when they come in. Do you use a car now? Do you not use a car now? And then over time, we can quantify whether that person is not using the car or why they still have to use the car and why. Are you within a bus route? Are you not in a bus route? And that. So success means that more people are using the advantages within this corridor of the mass transit and the bikes, and they feel comfortable with it. So that's what we hope to do, and we hope it's successful at it. And we try to make it as convenient to when you know when the next bus is going to come, because even if you're in Stockholm, Sweden, right when the next train is coming, or you missed the bus, right when the next one is, and that's why it's so convenient within Portland, Oregon, also, which in the downtown area, because of all that, the different mass transit, the traffic isn't that busy downtown.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Alder Heck.
Thank you. My question is probably for Mr. Held. Maybe Mr. Brink will have something to add to this. And I imagine some of my thoughts and questions might spill over into questions for staff, primarily traffic engineering. But just want to talk a little bit more about the TDM plan. And I noticed, and it's recognized, everyone recognizes that the data that went into producing this study, a fair number of it is a little bit outdated, and this is a very rapidly changing area with new commercial and residential buildings having gone up on the other side of East Washington, even since this data was taken. And I noticed that there are graphics and suggestions about traffic flow of cars, and there are some missing pieces of the puzzle. For instance, on Brearley, there is no recognition that there are stop signs at the Capital City Trail on Brearley, and because it's mostly. And you address some concerns and options for where Brearley hits Willie Street and so on, and Patterson and East Wash. And what I worry about, representing the district across the street, is that there's not a lot of concern about traffic, I don't think, that flows across East Washington. People perhaps coming and going from the north side or choosing to take Gorham Street to go west. And I wondered if you had any thoughts about how TDM could address any of those items, reduce traffic. I mean, I guess it's similar to what Commissioner Sundquist was getting at, is I want to make sure that that some goals include queuing and not impacting and reducing impact in not just the immediate vicinity, but also within a block or two.
Sure. So I think you might be referring to the TIA for some of those recommendations, the traffic impact assessment.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So there's that, and then the TDMP is a separate document. But it's a good question. And whenever we start a TIA, we sit down with the TE staff and we identify the area that we're going to study. And of course, there's got to be some limits to it. So I think you're right. We didn't look a lot north of East Washington Avenue. I do think that the traffic, the impacts will drop pretty quickly the more blocks you get away from the site. And I think that the natural sort of built-in advantages for alternate modes in this area should blunt the impact as much as you could probably hope for a densifying project like this. Kurt mentioned also the nice thing about this project being mostly office, it's nearly all office space, is that it sort of dovetails with a lot of the other redevelopment that has occurred recently. There's a lot of residential redevelopment in the area, and the office peaks from a traffic standpoint, not just cars, but people coming and going, tend to be sort of the opposite of the residential. So all of that works together pretty well. And frankly, that's why the plans that are in place recommend these kinds of mixes. That's why mixed use development is always more desirable from a traffic standpoint. So I think that, I guess one more thing I'll mention is that the immediately adjacent land uses to this site are there's a lot of industrial, there's not a lot of residential. And so I think that where the impacts are most acute, there should be a reduced impact on quality of life, because it's a lot of, there's a water utility building, there's a lot of MG&E land around this site. So I guess I'll leave it at that unless you have additional specific questions.
Well, I guess will the TIA, as it's called, will that be updated, or is that pretty much set and the TDM will be the living document?
I think the TDM will likely continue to be updated. The TIA was intended to cover the site in its entirety, and of course, as you mentioned, things get out of date pretty quickly. But there are some changes proposed, like you mentioned, at Burley and Williamson Street, and there's a partial signal, which is to be determined yet if that would be constructed. But there's a partial signal as an option on the other corner of the site. I think the development team would be willing to listen if traffic engineering felt there was a need to update the TIA. But I think particularly for this site, because we do hope to have such a mix of modes, there might be more value in continuing to update the TDMP as we move through the process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Are there questions of any registrants before I close the public hearing? Questions for any of the registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Solheim?
I have two questions, probably for Mr. Parks and perhaps traffic engineering. Related to the city-owned lot on Livingston, I'm curious for this item as well as the next item, kind of what the usage rate is at that lot. And I think, although would have been before I was on the commission, obviously, are there other agreements that the city has with employers or developments in the area? I'm just curious about the ability of that lot, to handle maybe some overflow if necessary from some of these developments.
Mr. Parks, is that something you want to take, or Mr. Parks?
I would recommend that traffic engineering staff weigh in first.
Okay. Which staff, Mr. Halverson or Malloy? Which one of you want to take that? Either raise your hand or in some way indicate which one is going to take it. Or maybe the tech facilitator could unmute both of you.
Sure.
Thank you.
You take it?
Mr. Halverson?
Sure. This is Sean Malloy from Traffic Engineering. The parking garage is more of a parking utility question, but we have had some conversations with Sabrina Talley, who's the parking manager. And, her take is that the parking usage at Livingston is, there's definitely more parking stalls. They have an excess supply for some of these agreements that are in the works, but I don't believe any agreements have been made between either this item or I believe the next item, which is the Moxie Hotel. But there have been conversations with the parking utility, and they have been monitoring the usage, especially during special events at the Sylvie and other East Washington events. So,
Okay. I think the question also dealt with the agreements that are already in place, like American Family. How much of the structure is committed? Mr. Malloy? Mr. Punt, it looks like you might have the answer to that. Do you want to go ahead and take that?
Yes. Okay. There we go. Yeah, and I know this tangentially because of the Moxie Hotel, but there are 550 spaces of the 650 are under a long-term lease agreements. However, the utility oversells spaces based on actual usage. The average occupancy for peak weekday hours in 2019 was only 42%. So there's quite a bit of space in that garage.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Solheim?
Yes, thank you. And I had one more for Mr. Parks. If this were to be approved and move forward, I understand we would be approving a reduction in the required parking. So I'm curious just if then that 680 stall number for the parking ramp would kind of be locked in per se, because we would be approving it as such. I know that the applicant mentioned that they found some additional stalls, but I know as plans develop, sometimes you lose stalls for mechanicals and bike parking and stuff like that. I'm just kind of curious if because of the structure of this approval, if that would kind of guarantee that number.
Well, the parking garage, and I believe Mr. Held indicated that the parking garage may be getting yet larger still. It was actually approved at 626 stalls. Through a recently approved alteration, grew to the 680 that I was aware of coming into tonight's meeting. And if it's getting a little bit bigger, that is probably just fine. We probably have to see what that looks like, and there may be some design details that may require approval either at the staff level or the Urban Design Commission level. Really what it's going to come down to is whether or not any additional development will be possible on the Archipelago Village site. As Mr. Hirsch showed during his presentation, they have designs for a building adjacent to the Wisconsin Telephone Building, kind of mid-block along the north side of East Main Street. That's not before you for tonight. That was just illustrative of their long-term plans for the remaining property. And really what we pointed out in the staff report, and I'll reiterate here, is it's incumbent upon the applicant to successfully implement their TDMP so that the site can accommodate additional development. And I think that's potentially where the city and the applicant have shared goals. They won't be able to develop the remaining property, and their existing development may struggle to be successful in the market if it does not provide adequate access for tenants and guests. And so the 680 or the 713 stalls, whatever that number is the number that they're potentially going to live with for the remainder, both to serve the 929 building that will start construction hopefully this summer, the building that's before you tonight, and any additional development that they contemplate for the property basically between the new parking garage and East Main Street. And if that doesn't answer your question, I'd be happy to take another run at it.
No, that was perfect. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Sundquist.
So just to follow on that helpful explanation from Mr. Parks, but this may be for TE. This is to reiterate a question that I asked Mr. Brink. When you go to have these discussions to determine if the TDM plan is working or not, what do you have a standard, or what are you looking for? Are you looking for problems with queuing, getting in and out, or are you looking for whether people are parking on the street, and if they are parking on the street, is that a problem? I mean, what's the? It doesn't have to be hard, yes or no, but is there at least some guiding principle for, not just I know it when I see it?
Mr. Halverson or Mr. Malloy, whoever wants to take it. Mr. Halverson, you're unmuted. Mr. Malloy, I think you might have to unmute yourself. Okay, it looks like both of you are muted. Could you unmute yourselves and please there?
All right.
Thank you.
All right, so the goal that we're looking for is a reduction in single occupant vehicles. We're trying to set a initial number, and that initial number has been 30%. The other reason that we wanted to make these a living document, have a continuing conversation, is that we'd be able to raise that where we see success, if that makes sense.
Okay, 30% SOVs entering and leaving compared to what, though? Compared to what the ITE manual suggests you would see, or what?
Correct. So we start with the ITE manual and go from there. But I do think your point about like people walking or driving, parking, and walking is another reason why we wanted to focus on the study to see what we're doing. So we just reduce parking or raise the cost, and then we get situations where people drive and park. Is that really the success that we're looking for, or is success more defined as are people using these alternatives in a serious, meaningful way? Okay. And do you have any sense of where similar buildings are in terms of that 30%? Or, all those buildings in the corridor may already be 30% below just because they're well located. I don't know. I think you're absolutely right, but that's also why we want the data. Is this a starting point too low? Should we be going higher? What is actually working out there to move the needle? And without meaningful data, I just don't know how to answer that at this time.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's helpful. That's a good answer.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Alder Heck.
Thank you. So I'd like to ask Mr. Halverson or Mr. Malloy a little to follow up a little bit on what I was discussing with the applicants. Can you describe the process that you go through in determining what improvements need to be made in the public right-of-way with respect to turning lanes and width and all these signals, stop signs? There are all these items in the TIA that were mentioned, and I kind of hinted that I was a little worried that the area across East Wash wasn't really considered. And can you just kind of briefly describe your evaluation of that information, because it's based on?
Sure. This is Sean from Traffic Engineering. So when we do our TIAs, when we first start, we meet with the developer's consultant, and we map out the different intersections that we'd like to have studied. Usually that's based on where we're seeing issues with capacity or other operational issues. So for this development, which was a rather large development, we did the intersections from East Washington to Willie Street at Patterson and Brearley. And they had them collect counts, and then they generated traffic based on the proposed development and added to those counts, what traffic was anticipated to be. And then the consultant had their recommendations based on that. And they also had, the distribution from where the traffic was coming from what locations. And I believe we had a fairly small number coming from, I guess, your neighborhood, from Gorham Street. We anticipated that most of this traffic was going to come down East Washington, which we think is still correct. And then they propose their alternatives if there are capacity issues or any other issues that they're seeing based on the traffic they're generating in excess to what's already there. So what we found from the TIA was that we were going to need an additional turn lane at Patterson and East Wash. There was a proposed signal at Brearley and East Washington. We still haven't vetted that out as traffic engineering staff as whether that is still feasible. At this point, it's undesirable for us to do it based on the spacing of signals. It'd be a challenging intersection, but we're exploring that option. I hope I've answered your question, I guess. If you have any questions.
Those future decisions are outside the development agreement. Is that correct?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Those future considerations that you're still evaluating are outside of the development agreement. You're not requiring the developers to subsidize any of these if they're, is that correct?
That's correct. The one in particular would be, if we signalize that Brearley East Washington intersection as the TIA described, that would be an assessment. That's been our policy for a while now for signals, is to assess them, because people on the north and south side would benefit from a proposed signal there.
Mm-hmm. And the additional lane at Patterson and East Washington, you feel there's sufficient room for that?
Yes, within the right-of-way there, we're able to, with another 4 feet of pavement, we're able to add the right turn lane. I guess our minimum dimensions for it. We've drawn up a plan. It's definitely going to be tight for that 100 feet or so from the intersection where that right turn is. Parking will have to be removed to implement it, but we believe that it can work and can fit within the current right-of-way.
Okay, that gives me some better understanding. Thank you.
Is that it, Alder? Yes. Okay. Any other questions of any of our registrants? Of staff. Sorry, of staff. Any other questions of staff? I am not seeing any raised hands for questions. I would be looking then for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I will move that the Plan Commission find that the conditional use standards have been met and approve the construction of the 5-story office building, which contains 92,000 square feet at 902 to 908 East Main Street.
Thank you. Commissioner Alder Rummel.
I second that.
Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell, do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes, I think this building fits perfectly into their plan, and it's one of the best designed office buildings I've seen in the last several years. And kudos to the architect and to the developer here, because I think it really complements the historic building that it adjoins. So I think it's a very well designed building and I'll like to see it finished.
Thank you. Commissioner Sundquist.
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to support this. I agree with everything Commissioner Cantrell just said. I just wanted to explain sort of my questioning on the TDM just a bit. It's an area of policy that still we're moving forward in Madison on after many years, but we're not there yet. And with my other hat as my day job at the university, I am privy to some conversations because we have a grant to work with Madison on this issue. So some of what I was asking about will be maybe coming back as in terms of policy reform in a few months, at least knock wood, hope so. Because, this, like Madison Yards, and Madison Yards will be coming back to us very soon after going to TPPB. So we'll have another bite at the TDM apple there. But both at Madison Yards and in this development, the enforcement mechanism, so to speak, is just that they can't do phase 2 if phase 1 doesn't tamp down the traffic enough. But a lot of developments don't have a phase 2. So there's a big question about doing TDM and keeping it and enforcing it and actually addressing traffic. So anyway, I think that the applicant has gone beyond what pretty much any applicant has done in Madison as far as laying out a TDM plan. That said, I don't think this should be the template for our policy once we establish better standards and so forth. And so hopefully some of the data that Mr. Halverson described being collected from this will help inform that. But hopefully it doesn't take forever to develop that policy. So, and we got the next one has a TDM plan in it too. So I guess we can talk about it a little bit more in a few minutes.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Alder Rummel.
Thank you, Chair. I support this project. I am kind of laughing in my head thinking I've been working on this project for about a decade with Mr. Brink and his family and the Korb family as he sort of slowly plotted his way to what we're at today. And so I'm really thankful that they took the risk in promoting employment when it's not an easy thing to do. And so landing WIDA and some of the other tenants that are coming, I think is really, appreciate that and kudos to you. And I also really wanted to appreciate that you heard neighbors and me talk about the importance of East Main Street, and you put this building in a way that I think will really help tell everyone else who wants to build on East Main Street what it could be like. So I think that's really important. And I just wanted to call out to the commissioners. It's in the UDC link, but the Marquette Neighborhood Association has written in support. They asked that the tree canopy be protected, and there's conditions about that, as well as the green roof, which I think that was addressed at UDC. And I'm just going to do this again to the development team because I am going to, I got to be consistent with myself. And that phase 3, which is not before us, it's really going to be important to me how that Wisconsin Telephone building is treated and, giving a neat old historic building breathing room and allowing it not to be overshadowed by whatever comes. But that'll be a future discussion. And I also really want to appreciate the discussion about TDMs because I guess I'm glad that we're going to be on the cutting edge here and learn more about it. So I thank you, Commissioner Sundquist, for helping us think about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder. Any other discussion? Any other discussion? I see no raised hands. I am going to assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. I'm looking to see if there's any raised hands to object. Seeing none, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to the next item on our agenda is agenda item 86172, Legistar number at 825 East Washington Avenue, Urban Design District 8, 6th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a commercial building at 825 East Washington Avenue and 824 East Main Street, consideration of a conditional use in the traditional employment district for a hotel, consideration of a conditional use in the traditional employment district to allow construction of a building exceeding 5 stories and 68 feet in height, consideration of a conditional use in the traditional employment district for restaurant taverns, consideration of a conditional use for a parking reduction of more than 20 automobile spaces and 25% or more of the required parking, and consideration of a conditional use in the TE district for outdoor eating areas for the restaurant taverns to allow construction of an 8-story, 151-room hotel with 2 restaurant taverns with outdoor eating areas. And we do have a staff presentation by Mr. Punt. You need to unmute yourself, I think. There you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you again, Commissioner Zellers. Before the commission now is a proposal to demolish 2 existing buildings and construct an 8-story, 151-room hotel at 825 East Washington Avenue. Staff has one primary question, which I would like to direct your attention to with this proposal, and that is whether the conditional use approval standard 5 is met with regards to the proposal's parking and vehicle access situation. The proximity of the city parking utilities Capitol East ramp, located just south across East Main Street, qualifies this proposal for an off-street parking availability adjustment per the zoning code. So technically it does meet the minimum parking requirements. However, as the proposal has only 4 vehicle parking stalls on site and no existing parking agreements, though the applicant has begun discussions with the parking utility, staff did want to raise the issue of parking to the commission. Again, as always, happy to answer questions when my time comes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Punt. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Andy Inman, 1600 Aspen Commons, Middleton, in support and wishing to speak, representing the North Central Group. Mr. Inman.
Thank you, Commissioner Zellers. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Mr. Punt. The North Central Group is here tonight for approval of our latest hotel project in Madison, the Moxie Hotel. With me tonight is Josh Wilcox, our project architect with GBA, and Ryan Burton, North Central Group's project manager. Jeff Lenz, our president and chief development officer, is also online here and available for questions. This project did receive unanimous approval from both the Neighborhood Preservation and Development Committee as well as the Association Board. I believe that letter is on file in Legistar. The Moxie, very briefly, it's a Marriott hotel that really brands itself on working hard and playing hard. It has small, stylish guest rooms and really just a great youthful experience. So North Central Group felt that this was a very good complement to the fabric of this part of the Capitol East corridor. We are proposing a 151-key hotel with a street-level bar called Bar Moxie. Bar Moxie doubles as guest registration, has a 2-story atrium fronting East Washington Avenue. Josh Wilcox will talk through the architecture in a little more detail. It has, you can see on the front rendering here, a 6th floor suite with balconies that would be overlooking Breeze Stevens Field. And then at the top, you can see the third-party restaurant and event space. The rooftop design really is not just a neighborhood amenity, but similar to what we did down at the AC Hotel, which has been very successful. We elevated the best views, the best spaces in the building. So it's something that all of the guests and really every Madison resident can enjoy. Ultimately, the complement of the uses here, both the hotel, adding to the fabric of the neighborhood, as well as the event space and restaurant space, really adds as an amenity to the great things going on in the neighborhood currently. If you could forward to slides 2 and 3, kind of pass through those quickly. Those are just context photos. A lot of the same neighborhood we've been talking about and some of the great things going on now in the redevelopment. Slide 4 shows the site plan. I'll touch briefly on this, but certainly can answer more questions as Commissioner Solheim and some others asked about parking. But the site plan has very strong pedestrian access both to East Main and East Washington Avenue. All of the vehicle arrival and guest loading and unloading would be on site, nothing occurring off site. We're working with the city and 2 other private property owners on parking for guests. And the last slide is slide 7. If you could forward there. Won't talk in detail here, but what we wanted to do is just provide kind of a gift to the street, if you will, with elevating the mechanical spaces.
Mr. Inman, your time is up.
Great.
So
we'll leave it on the slide. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will ask if commissioners have any questions of Mr. Inman. Seeing no raised hands, thank you very much, Mr. Inman. The next registrant is Ryan Burton, 4115 Cherokee Drive, Madison, in support and wishing to speak, representing the North Central Group. Mr. Burton.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, just fine.
Yeah, my name is Ryan Burton. I'm with North Central Group, and I just want to speak very briefly about a very specific portion of the project, and it can be seen actually in part on this slide here, and that is the mural that we are proposing for the Main Street side of the building. We really wanted to focus on the Main Street side of the building and not just be biased towards East Washington. And that's very intentional on our part. We intended for a mural to be a landmark or a beacon for the neighborhood. We really wanted to treat Main Street as one of our main entrances and not neglect it. We also wanted to be a part of the vibrant art scene that's happening already on Main Street. And so that's why we're looking at engaging local artists and bringing them in so that whatever the piece actually is, because right now it's just a placeholder, whatever that piece is, we want it to speak to the neighborhood and reflect the neighborhood. And so we found it really important that one of our, to be honest, larger investments in regards to the facade is facing that Main Street area, is looking at the neighborhood directly and not ignoring Main Street or ignoring the neighborhood. And so that's kind of the big idea. That I know it's a very specific part of the project, but it's a really important part of the project to us. And we really want to utilize that and be supportive of local art and artists. And by hiring them to do these projects, but also to be a part of it, to be kind of a landmark or a location that people look for public art. That's all I have at this moment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burton. Are there any questions of Mr. Burton? Seeing no raised hands, our next registrant is Joshua Wilcox, 2248 Deming Way in Middleton, in support and wishing to speak, representing the North Central Group. Mr. Wilcox.
Good evening, Josh Wilcox here with GBA. We're the architects on the project, and I'm just going to hit briefly on the architectural component. And Colin, if you could, or Mr. Punt, can you move to one of the rendered shots further in the packet? There you go. That's perfect. Thank you. This project is a classic example of an urban infill, a very narrow site. And for a group like North Central Group to consider a site like this really speaks to what this area has become. And that is a destination for a lot of young people. And that's why the Moxie brand and people of all ages, for that matter, is such a good fit here. And so as this urban infill takes place, you see a lot of unique components to make this project viable. And it really speaks to what's going on East Wash and also Main Street. And you heard Ryan speak to that. So I'll just touch a little bit of what's going on East Wash. So we address that facade a little bit differently than the remainder of the building. It ties into a little bit more of the historic fabric of that neighborhood, much like you saw in some of the earlier presentations. There's a little bit of an industrial vibe, a grit to it, with a fully activated patio out front, so that we get both the pedestrian traffic and also the vehicle traffic going by to activate that space. It's dark. There's a lot of transparency and darkened materials with a lot of transparency deep into that narrow lot to really bring it to life and to add more vibrancy to what Spark has started and what's going on further up and down the street. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about the materials on it. It's kind of a classic timeless design. We're not trying to do something here to gather too much attention with some of the architecture that's already in place. We're a little bit more of a background building that's a transitional structure. So you see metal, glazing, concrete, things of that nature through here done in just a simple form to fit nicely into the neighborhood. I will add that some of the funky features that you see in back does create kind of a two-sided design that we feel really takes advantage of what this area has to offer, so that we are allowed to treat the front of the building one way and the back of the building a little different, to pay the respect to what's going on Main Street and not just give all of our attention to that East Watch. I can go into more detail, but given the limited amount of time and really I think where some of the focus is going to be, I'd be happy to answer any other questions you have related to architecture, more of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Wilcox. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. This question is for Josh or anyone else who on the team wants to speak to it. Overall, I think it's a good project, but my questions remain about the East Main Street presence, and you talked about two-sided design. Do you have you only have renderings that just show it from very far away. And I guess I have a series of questions. First, about that structure that would house dumpsters and a generator. And if you could talk about noise and smells and what you anticipate keeping that away from the street. And could you also identify the setback from the back of the building to the street?
You bet.
Those two questions.
All right, Colin, can you go back to yes, that one right there. Thank you. In our full set, that was part of our land use submittal. We have even more technical details on this. This is the presentation set that we've used for UDC and for Plan Commission here. But the long and short of it is that gift to the street structure there. You can see where some of the inspirational imagery has come from. Is a unique structure, and that's why we like it. It's a unique street. It's got a lot of different funky things going on it, and this really just kind of adds to the character of what's going on there with everything at Spark, all the other entertainment venues, and now Tinsmith, our direct neighbor there. And so how are we doing it? We are 15 feet, so we meet the setback requirement. And by using high quality durable materials that'll stand up to the use that's there, we are enclosing our refuse that comes in and out and is fed from our drop-off zone that's coming from East Wash. One of the unique things of this is just doing that cargo container with the Core 10, the rusted metal look that you see. That's consistent with some of the other things that have, other materials that have gone on in the neighborhood. We're just trying to blend into that and just do it in a little different format to create a unique look. And actually, that's the generator that provides the standby and backup power for the hotel and restaurant that sits on top of the trash enclosure. Because this is such a narrow site and there is such a premium on square footage, both vertically and horizontally, we have to be creative to come up with different ways to do this. And we feel we'll be able to control the smells because we'll have trash pickups on timely manners. And we've talked through this in great detail with North Central Group's operational team. And they've demonstrated on like the AC Hotel and other urban projects throughout the country that they're able to control this and manage that. Because ultimately, the guest that shows up to that, if that's their first impression is a smell or a look or something isn't right, it's going to be more impactful to their business than potentially even the loading dock next door for the Spark building.
Well, thank you. I'm less concerned about the design, which I think is very attractive, but about the noise and the smells. Just recently, I was walking by like the Gebhardt building and just waiting for somebody, and their generator was just so loud, you couldn't have had a conversation there. And so that was what worries me. Like, I don't want it, like this is like the back door of like the front door. We want to make sure that it's, I get the back of the house stuff is somewhat going to be located here, but just that we minimize those impacts. My second question is, the drive aisle just has like those really wide wings out, and it seems like if you were a pedestrian walking down the sidewalk, you have a really wide drive aisle to cross to get to the other side. And can you just help us understand what that really, how wide that is, and what, just the angle of the exit?
Alder Rummel, just first for the noise concerns. So obviously as a hotel, the number one priority is a good night's sleep for the guest. So it'll be critical to control the noise associated with any kind of trash pickup, and then the generator. The generator is typically done on weekends at 9 or 10 a.m. when it's tested once a month. So that shouldn't be going on very often. If it is, there'll be an emergency that would, you would expect something like that. And again, the trash pickups will be done during the day, much like in other urban properties when the noise won't be there. In addition to that, Spark does have their loading dock right next to there. And that is one of the reasons we located it there, so we could group those amenities together and kind of isolate those. As it relates to our curb cut on the street, that is a standard curb cut there. We've worked in the past and we've talked a little bit with engineering regarding that. And so that's going to be a standard width with the sidewalk running through there and a typical apron, and don't really see anything that's going to be out of the ordinary with that. If there is some concerns, we are happy to work with engineering to make that as functional as possible for both the pedestrian and obviously for the hotel guest.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Mr. Wilcox? Commissioner Sundquist.
Well, I'm not sure which of the team to direct another transportation question to. If that's, are they going to have others, or should we?
We have one more registrant in opposition, so not on the development team.
Okay, so if this isn't for Mr. Wilcox, maybe one of the others. So I guess you guys were on for the previous conversation. I'm not going to repeat all of that. To me, your TDM plan is, it doesn't have a lot of commitments in it, but I think it's okay because one of the best TDM measures that you can have is to restrict the parking. So it's there's an onus on the operator of the hotel to minimize the use of this rental parking because it's just a cost. It's just it's the valets and the cost of the renting the spaces. So to me, that wasn't, if I'd written that plan, I would have said, we want to minimize that, and that's why we're doing the shuttles and everything else. And that would have been pretty compelling. But that said, is there any specific plan for TDM for the employees? This would seem like a great opportunity to do parking cash out. And we don't have that very often in Madison, but this would be a great case where you, because you do have an out-of-pocket cost to the hotel, presumably to provide parking for employees, that if they don't avail themselves of it, they can, get that money themselves. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're just paying to park and finding parking on their own, in which case it's moot. So what's the deal with employee parking?
I would ask that we direct that question to Andy Inman.
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted.
No, yeah, you're good.
Sure. So just very briefly, I mean, you're spot on. The questions on the last agenda item. What is the measure of success? It is a reduction in traffic counts relative to, published ITE numbers. The hotel itself, the brand, we have very good metrics just up the street at the AC Hotel, 6 blocks away. So this isn't theoretical for us. We actually know the numbers, know what we're doing there, and can translate that to the Moxie. The Moxie by brand will attract fewer vehicle trips than the AC does. The AC is only capturing about 60% of guest rooms relative to 60% vehicle of the guest rooms are capturing an actual vehicle trip. Relative to our more suburban locations, we're getting at least 1 car per guest room on average is what our normal parking counts are out there. So we know with the AC Hotel we're meeting that metric, and we know with the Moxie we'll meet that metric. We are also working with our employees at the AC Hotel and would do similar things here with the Moxie. It is a little closer to neighborhoods where some of our employees may live. So I think the bikeability, the walkability, some of the scores that Mr. Hirsch referenced on the last agenda item would apply here as well. But then encouraging, public transportation, ride sharing, things like that. We have at times, it's not a regular thing, but we've looked at shuttling employees from one location to a more urban location. So there are a number of different things that we're employing with. I would agree with you that the plan isn't overly detailed, but I can assure you that we do have those sorts of provisions already occurring at the AC Hotel, which didn't have that standard to require a TDM plan in place.
But specifically, do you give free parking to employees or not?
To some of them, not to all. We give some to the property management team, but majority of our employees are either carpooling or taking public transportation. So there is a pretty robust decrease of what you would see from a more suburban location, even with our employees.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to harp on it or get this in the way of the approval, but just as a good business practice, you may want to look at parking cash out. It could save you some money and ratchet down that SOV count just a little bit more.
Yeah, we absolutely are. Very, very valid points. We're continuing to evaluate that and work with that with our operations team.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. Commissioner Spencer.
Just to build on the question about employee parking at the AC, do you happen to know where your employees live and exactly what kind of transportation that they're using? And then in terms of using public transportation, I'm assuming the bus, I'm assuming you have some shifts that end pretty late at night. Is public transportation available to them? And I'm also thinking about safety.
Yeah, not for all. Enovino is located on the top floor at the AC Hotel, and they're closing up. And I don't think there's good public transportation availability for some of those shifts that end up in the late evening. But it really varies. Where they live is across Madison, how they commute. Like I said, some of our property management team drive and have parking on site at the AC. A lot of them are taking most of our shifts. If you think about it, our largest shift is through the heart of the day. So public transportation is available to those team members. Some of the shoulder team members for the hotel team members that maybe don't have that ability, but those numbers are much smaller relative to the peak employee account we have during the day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for any members of the development team before we go to our last registrant? Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I have a question on where the development team is at on lease parking, and what is the parking number that you're trying to provide for lease? You speak about the need for parking at 60% per beds, and I know the city requirement is 75%. And also the restaurants that you're proposing, it's to be determined. So where are you at, and kind of can you speak to that, please?
Sure. We think based on our experience with AC, we are very confident we'll be below that 60% capture. So as far as what we did for the AC hotel, that was just a great win-win, both for the city of Madison as well as for us. Rather than building, we saw it with an earlier agenda item out at Hilldale about building a parking structure. Is it needed? Does it need to be that large? What the hotel allows us to do is really complement the parking stalls. And with the AC, we entered into a lease with the city, and it was kind of that win-win where it allowed the city to lease the parking stalls to us, where our demand is overnight. The reference of the peak occupancy of 42% at the Livingston ramp, that's peak during the day. In the evening, it is much, much lower. We've met with Frank Productions, Gephardt Development, who really study Gephardt developed the Livingston ramp. And they are very much supportive of our use coming in to really complement the daytime uses, and allows the city to sell that parking stall twice, once during the day to an office user, and then once at night back to us. As far as where we're at, we've been working with Sabrina Talley down at the parking utility for several months now. It seems like a lifetime ago, kind of pre-COVID, where we met with her. She was in the process at the time of studying occupancies, and some of the numbers that I think Mr. Punt identified earlier were probably a result of that analysis. We have not been able to connect with her, just with, I'm sure, the many priorities she has, trying to plug some revenue shortfalls and manage the process that she's having to manage right now. But we are actively reaching out and looking to further that. And then we've got 2 private property owners that we are communicating with, kind of the same concept, where they are maybe leasing during the day, but we would be able to complement that use with an evening use for parking.
Do you have any other questions, Commissioner Cantrell? It looks like he might be frozen, but okay.
I might have put him to sleep with the answer.
Okay, any other questions of the development team? I do have one question. The northeast facing side of the building looks out over a 1- and 2-story buildings. What happens if that's redeveloped?
So we have a airspace easement with that property. That's a agreement that pre-existed us, but I believe it's at the 4th story. The property that we are developing on maintains that airspace easement along basically it's the front half along East Washington Avenue. So we have designed that intentionally. We have a 5-foot setback. So from a building code perspective, that allows us to have the window openings you see here with a 10-foot separation between the buildings.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Not seeing any other hands raised. Last registrant is Ira Hafer Flowers, 836 Jennifer Street, opposed and wishing to speak. Ira Flowers.
Can you hear me?
You're on. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Ira Hafer Flowers. In May, I celebrated my 4th year of Madison residency.
As an East Sider, I have seen the Lapham, Tenney, and Williamson Street neighborhoods go through beneficial and welcome changes in regards to a development. And today I want to talk about the proposed hotel, Moxie, which I firmly believe is a decision that will not benefit locals nor provide sizable economic return. First, it should be mentioned that hotels are not destinations, but rather means to an end for people who are looking to stay in our town. I worked for a combined 3 years at the Hyatt on West Washington and the downtown Doubletree location and observed that there are loyalists to any big name hotel chain, but individuals who are simply looking for an affordable, convenient hotel room are much more common. I'm sure that the Sylvie and the expanded use of the Breese Stevens Field has provided more business to justify the construction of a hotel, which is the fourth, I believe, in the 10-block radius of the proposed build, and the third, maybe the fourth Marriott hotel. But maybe we should invest in solutions that help the community members of Dane County access these venues instead of relying on outsiders to spend upwards of $150 nightly. Moreover, part of Moxie's appeal is its automated features, so it will not provide many jobs for locals who are seeking employment and hospitality long term. McKinsey Global Institute study projects projects food and hospitality services will lose 5% of workforce to automation by 2030. And for Moxie, this is a feature. Finally, the 24-hour food and beverage services sound appealing, but detract from local businesses that, particularly during these times of COVID-19, we should be making clear efforts to lift up. I do not speak on behalf of, but have patronized many businesses of the 800 block of East Washington, and it should be, or it would be rather, a shame to replace options like Ravinia Courtyard, Vintage, and Cargo with more corporate options that lack Madison roots. There's a careful ecosystem in Madison, particularly on the growing east side. It is flattering that developers are consistently interested in expanding East Washington, but I firmly believe that it would be upsetting to the ecosystem of the 800 block of East Washington to build an 8-story hotel that does not have community interests. I do not oppose using the proposed site for other purposes, but as it is not foundationally problematic, oppose the complete destruction of it. Instead, I call on Alders Patrick Hack and Marsha Rummel to push for the renovation of 825 East Washington to function as either community housing or local storefronts. We have to protect original buildings in Madison, particularly ones that are still functional. I conclude with a statement. The development of Moxie at 825 East Washington will do seemingly little for the local economy in a space where we could continue to build up the east side for its residents. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions for this registrant? I see no raised hands. The next registrant is Aaron Cook, Waterton Road, Brookfield, in support, not wishing to speak. And Jeff Lenz, North Central Group, Verona, Wisconsin, available to answer questions. Dustin Drazen, Deming Way, Middleton, in support, not wishing to speak, representing the North Central Group. AJ Robachek, Deming Way, Middleton, in support, not wishing to speak, representing the North Central Group. Alan Dellinger, Cherokee Circle, and Madison, opposed, not wishing to speak. Are there questions for any of the registrants? Seeing no raised hands, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Solheim.
Yes, I have a question for Mr. Punt. So I noticed when the item was being read on the agenda that it mentions consideration of a conditional use for a parking reduction. However, that's not in the requested action, I believe, because of the proximity to the parking garage. So I just wanted to confirm that that zoning section, in my opinion, seems to be kind of a perfect fit for this situation where it's a very tight site. It would be very difficult to have parking on site. It's in, the nighttime use is very complementary to the other daytime use of the parking ramp. So I just wanted to confirm that the parking amounts itself are not a conditional use reduction. Rather, you're bringing it up as a standard related to the other conditional uses. Is that correct?
Yes, you are correct. It was put in the agenda as a reduction as we were still kind of working through what the details of all the different things that the zoning code says about parking. To make sure we didn't miss something. But this falls under a section of the code that is a parking adjustment because of its proximity to that public parking structure. So your assumptions are correct. There's not a conditional use for a reduction needed here. It's compliant under the zoning code. However, as it is a conditional use, one of the standards refers to vehicle access and the way that people come and go from the site. And it's obviously part of that. So that should be something that the Plan Commission does also consider.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have right now.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of staff? Seeing no raised hands, I'm looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
I will move that the Plan Commission find that the standards for the demolition permit and the conditional use permit have been met, and recommend that the construction of this 8-story hotel in the 900 block of East Washington.
Does that conclude your motion?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me, it's 800 block of East Washington.
800. Okay, thank you. Alder Rummel.
I second.
Okay, Commissioner Cantrell, do you want to speak to your motion?
Briefly, I think this is an appropriate use for this location. It is an infill, and I think it complements the other uses within this area. And I think that it will be very successful.
Thank you. Any Alder Rummel?
Thank you. I just wanted to respond to the one speaker, Mr. Flowers, about different types of uses that he would have preferred to see. And I was trying to raise my hand before you ended the public hearing. I would have tagged Heather to talk a little bit about that, but I wanted to make clear that the zoning and the adopted plans call for employment uses here, not housing. The property owner did certainly was interested in housing, and we told him as both Alder and staff that that wasn't really the approach that we would support. And then luckily they found the Moxie, and certainly hotels are a thing that seem to be popping up everywhere, and I wish them all well, and I'm always kind of questioning what the market is, but they got to do their job, and if they have assumed correctly, then I think they've got a good project and have used the site well, and I support it. Thanks.
Thank you, Alder Rummel. Anything else? Okay, then we will come to a vote. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hands, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 10. Legistar 60346, 1933 Kaiser Avenue, 13th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the traditional residential consistent 3 district to construct an accessory building containing an accessory dwelling unit. I don't believe we have any staff presentation on this one. I will move then to the registrants. First, I will open the public hearing. And the first registrant is Janice Pullman, 1925 Keyes Avenue, Madison, opposed, wishing to speak. Ms. Pullman.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, I'm at 1925 Keyes Avenue. It's a house that's directly adjacent to 1933. It's a ranch house that was built in the 1950s, and I've got 12 solar panels on the top of it. Those 12 solar panels have generated 19.7 megawatt hours since the panels were installed in 2013. So that's about 1 megawatt hour powers, they say, 330 homes for 1 hour. So that's something that's really important to me. So when I got the postcard in the mail, I was unaware of the project. That's on me. I'm sure Ann and Jane have been very transparent about this, but I've had other life things going on. So this is why I registered today and registered opposed. However, today I really scrambled. I called Burke O'Neill at Full Spectrum Solar. He was the installer. He didn't have the schedule today to talk to me, so I did get a hold of Niels Volter, who owns Madison Solar Consulting. He opened up a Zoom meeting with me this afternoon, and we walked through the project plans that you have on the website and all the design for this detached garage with residential structure on top. And it's Niels' opinion that none of my solar panels will really be affected, or at least to a great deal. So I've come full circle. I wasn't necessarily opposed. I just was really struggling for time, even last night through this morning. So I actually, looking at the project, I think it's a nice design. It's something that I think is very typical of what's getting produced from Jake Morrison and Ann as well. So I think it's fine. I'm not opposed any longer. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pullman. Are there any questions, Ms. Pullman?
From me?
No, to you, okay. From the commissioner. Yeah. Seeing no questions of this registrant, the next registrant is Jacob Morrison, 1933 Keyes Avenue, Madison, in support, wishing to speak. Mr. Morrison.
There's nobody in the queue by that name.
Sure,
Ann Morrison is here, though.
Pardon me?
Ann Morrison is here.
Yeah, that's the next registrant. Ann Morrison, 1933 Keyes Avenue, in support, wishing to speak. Ms. Morrison.
Thank you. I'm here with Jake, so he can take a turn after me, but I'll speak first. Thank you to the commission and to Janice for your testimony. I do wish we had been able to connect beforehand and saved ourselves several hours and been on the consent agenda, but I'm glad that the outcome is something that gives her confidence about her solar panels in the house that she owns. So we have lived in our home for 12 years. And Janice, until a couple of years ago, was our neighbor there and owns that property next door. We did reach out to all our immediate neighbors in March, and we responded to all the questions from the neighbors that had them, and we received good feedback. This garage and studio project, we really have three goals with it. One, we want to replace our deteriorating 2-car garage and reinvest in our home. 2, we want to reduce our physical footprint, increase our green space on our yard, and we want to recommit to being a single-car household, which we are and have been. And 3, while we're doing our new garage, we want a sustainable land use that we think is consistent with the comp plan and the long-term health of our community. So that's it. I'll let Jake take over.
I won't add that much. I just want to say that I'm very sensitive and totally understand Janice's concern. We definitely support solar power, and we specifically designed it so that the mass of the building shifts more towards our house so that it would not impact her wonderful solar panels. I don't think I
think, do you want to add that the footprint of the garage is again smaller than what it is currently as proposed, and also pushes the garage back a little bit, so it is more in line with the adjacent houses instead of standing proud of it. And then I guess if there are questions, Jake can walk the commissioners through the plans, but I think it's pretty straightforward. So
okay, thank you, Ms. Morrison and Mr. Morrison. Are there any questions for either of those registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there any questions of staff? Commissioner Sundquist.
So first, hi to my neighbors down the street on Kai's, where we can probably look out our windows and say hello to each other. And I'm glad that you guys worked it out. And I'm glad that our chair knows how to pronounce Kai's. It doesn't always happen. Quick question for staff. This is a happy ending here, but don't we have some kind of a solar easement on the books here where you're not allowed, if somebody has solar panels, you're not allowed to obstruct them?
We don't in Madison. We don't have that at this point. The concern has come up in a couple of other projects, much taller buildings. I think it came up in a project that never came to fruition with a 4-story building next to some single family homes. But we don't have that protection in Madison at this point.
Oh, thank you. I must have remembered maybe somebody proposing it or talking about it at one point. I thought we had it. So maybe that needs to be on some kind of a list as well, because you'd hate for, this is working out, but you'd hate for this to have to be somebody to invest a lot in solar and then all of a sudden it's in the shade.
Any other questions? I'm looking then for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I'll move that the Plan Commission find the conditional use standards are met and approve the construction of the accessory building that contains an accessory dwelling unit at 1933 Kai's Avenue.
Do I have a second? Alder Lemmer.
I will second.
Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, I think the project has worked out well. I think it's a good addition.
Okay. Any comments or discussion? Seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. I am looking for raised hands. I do not see any. The motion passes unanimously. That concludes our meeting and agenda items. So do I have a motion to adjourn? Alder Lemmer. Okay. Okay. And seconded by Commissioner Spencer. I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a hand raised otherwise. Okay. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.